To find a middle ground on this to get those government doors open to avoid just the thing we're looking at right now, a canceled State of the Union speech, at least in the well of the House. Senator, very good to have you. Thanks for coming.
Neil, thanks for having me on again.
What do you think of this?
I think it's childish. You know, it just escalates the partisanship we've already got in this town. And it's become a tit for tat thing too. So, then the president cancels her airplane to go see the troops. We've got to all take a step back here and get back to actually doing the people's business.
But you're not, right? You're not. So I'm wondering what happens. I know we have these two votes tomorrow in the Senate, a Democratic measure or a Republican measure, likely neither to get the 60 votes needed. So where do we go with this?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the president's proposal will get pretty much all Republicans, including me. It's a good proposal. I mean, the president has put forward a plan that not only has the new barriers along the border that he wants, but it also has many of the priorities that the Democrats want in terms of border security, and it has this expansion of the DACA and the TPS group that the Democrats have been calling for.
Right.
So it really is an olive branch, and it's an opportunity for us to find some common ground. Tomorrow we'll probably sort of have a shirts and skins vote, but my hope is that there will be some amendments offered that will be bipartisan. I'm working on that, as you indicated earlier. I'm meeting this afternoon with a bunch of Democrats and Republicans, a bunch of us who realize this is not good for anybody. It's not good for the economy. It's certainly not good for the taxpayers, and it's not good for the families who are affected.
Who was in that group then, Senator, with whom you met?
Well, it's a lot of members who have been public, so I can say some of their names. Tim Kaine, for instance, from Virginia, has been a leader on dealing with this DACA issue and the TPS issue. These are people that have a protected status right now. On our side, Lindsey Graham has been very involved. So is Lamar Alexander and others. So it's been just a group of members that have said, it's time for us to actually figure out how to find a way forward to get out of this mess. Shutdowns don't make sense. But the president's proposal on the border is very reasonable. What he's talking about is not 2,000 miles of a cement wall. In fact, he was never talking about that. He's talking about, in his latest proposal, 234 miles of barriers, including fencing for people, including some barriers for vehicles, and yes, including some steel barriers he's talked about that are pretty substantial. But it's in the areas of the border where everybody agrees it's needed. It's based on a plan that experts put together saying, what are the top 10 priorities for the border? Starting with Texas, where you've only got 100 miles of fence, despite the fact that it's 1,200 miles of the 2,000-mile border. So
you
I think
feel
it's
the
a reasonable
president has
plan.
made enough overtures that Democrats should respond. They heard funding for a wall and said no, even though the president's counter was security, and they said security, and they were both in agreement on that the wall was a fixation. So words mean everything, apparently.
Words do mean everything.
Let me get a sense from
Neil,
you.
Let me just say,
how long is it the issue with the wall? They were open, Democrats apparently said, to the $5 billion plus for border security, but not a wall. What's the distinction?
Well, first of all, the president doesn't have a cement wall in his plan. What he has is, again, various kinds of fencing. 234, well, it says barriers in the request that he made. 234 miles, not 2,000 miles. And he's doing it consistent with a plan that the Customs and Border Protection people have put forward that has been involved in both of the last appropriations bills, last year's bill and this bill, on a bipartisan basis.
No, you're right.
This plan makes sense.
Let's be clear then, Senator.
So that's where we are.
He calls it a barrier. You called it a barrier. Others have called it, security at the border. If he avoids the term wall, apparently, which sticks in the craw of a lot of Democrats, and to your point, same Democrats who voted for this earlier and under Barack Obama at least twice. But having said that, do you think that would get the monkey off everyone's back? It's something as simple as semantics.
It would help. It would help, because right now we're talking past each other. I mean, when you hear what the Democrats are saying, how they're characterizing the president's proposal, it's not accurate. But also, let's be honest, the way the president is characterizing it sometimes makes it sound like it's a wall all the way across the border.
Do you regret that the president, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, sir, and I understand that, but that attaching funding for the government, in other words, attaching this to potential shutdown if he didn't get his way, was the right way to go, that this has now set the stage that simply won't end?
Well, let me say something first about your previous comment. The president has used the word barrier repeatedly, and he has said repeatedly it's not a cement wall anymore. Now, at other times he's used the word wall. So he's sort of said both, and people have chosen.
Well, he might have changed it from cement to steel, but he was a little often using wall. And through the campaign, we ran just a few bites where wall came up.
Right.
You're quite right, though. He has shifted in that position. He has shown a willingness to do that. But Democrats are still saying wall, wall, wall. We're not going to do something with a wall. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, well, I think you have an honest conversation where the facts are presented, which is that we do have an increase in people crossing the border. In the last 2 months of last year, we had more people crossing, actually twice as many people as the year before. We had a 50% increase in kids and families. So we do have an issue on the border that has to be addressed. He's right. The drug issue is very real. It's crystal meth. It's heroin. It is coming across the Mexican border. We also have issues of human trafficking, women and children being trafficked increasingly. So there is a crisis on the border. I don't think you can avoid saying that. And we have now a proposal that is a reasonable proposal. Do Democrats have some changes they'd like to make? Yes. Let's make those changes. I think the president would be okay with that. But in the meantime, let's do open government. And this is where you and I have talked about this before. I never believed that shutting down government provided leverage. One, I think it's a bad idea to shut down government. The taxpayer ends up losing. Families of workers end up losing. The economy ends up getting hit. So it really doesn't make sense. I don't think it provides leverage. But what I do think is the president's got a proposal that needs to be taken seriously.
As you know, sir, I'd be remiss, but you sit on foreign relations. Venezuela is erupting into civil and violent war at that. President Nicolas Maduro has broken off relations with the United States, will not recognize the U.S. government. We've urged our personnel there to get out of there. All of this as Juan Guaido, the challenger, is being recognized by us, and now the Canadians, we're told the Brits, as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. They want interim elections, but it is mass confusion in a country that is seeing inflation run amok, and it's getting worse. What do you think we should do?
It's getting worse. It's a tragic situation. You have millions of Venezuelans who are now fleeing the country, including going into some of our allied countries like Colombia and creating enormous challenges there, somewhat comparable to what you see in the Middle East with regard to Syrian refugees going into Europe and other places. So this is a huge problem, not just for Venezuela and the people of Venezuela who are bearing the brunt of this, but also for other countries in the region.
Well, President Trump has recognized and would recognize Juan Guaido as a legitimate interim president while they sort this out. But if there is violence here, Nicolas Maduro, who is seen even among Venezuelans now as not the legitimate ruler of Venezuela.
Right.
And he fights this, and violence escalates there. Should American personnel be involved there to support Mr. Guaido?
Well, I think we should be involved only as part of a multinational effort. And by the way, the countries in the region all agree with us. I mean, they have no allies left to speak of. And increasingly, countries are saying, why don't we come together as a group of Latin American and North American countries to address this issue? And that's the right way to do it. So I think we need to be careful not to do it unilaterally, but I think in conjunction with the other countries, the so-called OAS countries, we should definitely be taking
But they're not
more
doing
actions.
anything, right? And I understand the trepidation on our part and those in the region from Colombia to Ecuador, everyone else. But there will likely be a lot of violence, as you know, beyond those kind of incidents for which Maduro is well known, killing a lot of political enemies, journalists, you name it. If it escalates to that, Senator, do you think, or would you advise the President of the United States, we must do something?
It's something we should look at. But again, Neil, I'd want to do it on a multilateral basis. We have a lot of support in the region for this. The UN ought to be more involved. Other than Cuba, nobody's really supporting Maduro, and so we have him isolated, and we got to take advantage of that.
All right, Senator, thank you very much. I know you have a crazy schedule.
Thanks, Neil.
We do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.